Hello and welcome to the deck that got its name from this.
The Rock came out to surprise the millions of the Rock fans.
So originally Phyrexian Plague Lord was supposed to be the Rock and Hermit was his minions. Most decks don't play the Plague Lord anymore, but we still kept the name. Now at its core, this deck is just a value grindy deck that has tons of options available, but there are several different archetypes that you can build. There's the Living Wish build, which has a ton of toolbox creatures and lands, and also can consistently put out a turn 3 Baloth, much more than the other versions can. There's the Recurring Nightmare builds that are just absolute value engines, recurring things with Nightmare. And then there's a lesser played, very much lesser played, Natural Order version that attempts to sneak out a Verdant Force as quickly as possible. So the absolute staples in this deck are Ravenous Baloth and Pernicious Deed, usually as 4-ofs. This deck has so many options that you can really play a whole host of different cards, but you will always see those two. You'll also almost always see some form of Discard and Disruption, usually these two, as well as Wall of Blossoms as a roadblock and Yavimaya Elder for value. But it's also worth saying some people are starting to play Crows and Tusker instead of the Elder. So we also almost always see some kind of mana ramp. Wall of Roots is better against creatures because it's a bit big and it can block. Birds helps to fix our mana. And so these are the beaters we're trying to ramp into. Baloth we spoke about before. Blastoderm is absolutely massive and can't be targeted. And Spiritmonger is also a massive threat. And for removal, these three are generally the most played ones, but of course there's tons of options and you can play whatever fits your meta best. Also, don't forget Pernicious Deed. This card can just sit on the board, creating a massive headache for your opponent. The value cards, Recurring Nightmare, if you're playing it, can give you insane value, as can these other two. We also have tons of toolbox creatures, especially if you're playing the Living Wish version. There's too many to list here, but you can basically get a creature or land that does whatever you need to do at any time. And speaking of lands, the man lands, almost every single Rock deck plays those. The others also see play, but obviously we want to limit the number of colourless mana sources we're playing. We do need to be able to play our coloured spells. There's quite a few double green cards. And for sideboard, we've got tons of options as with everything else. These are some of the most common cards that you usually see, but again, there's so many options for this deck. So we're firmly a mid-range deck. Against combo and control, we're trying to disrupt them while we can beat them down with a Baloth or a Blastoderm. Against aggro, we're trying to stall the game out and then just value them out with a Deed and other such big creatures that they can't attack through. It's actually quite hard to splash in Premodern because of the mana bases, the lands aren't really there, but there is one notable beast version of this deck that did quite well. However, it's not really common that you see splashes. The strengths, it's super iconic and we can actually beat anything. We have tons of options to do really whatever we want to do. Discard helps us to inform which of those options to put into play at any given time. But the weakness is also we have tons of options. So if you don't know what to do, then you might have some difficulty. So here's a list, and a huge shout out to Brian Durkin and Aaron Dix who gave me tons of information about this deck. And I would recommend checking out TC Decks because this deck has tons of different options